We're delighted that Sabrina Simmons, class of 1990, Executive VP and CFO of Gap Inc., is here with us today. Our topic is execution, and I'm going to ask you about where do you think your role sits between vision and execution?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I mean, obviously, both vision and execution are super critical, but we also know if you can't execute, the vision isn't worth a whole lot. So execution's very important. I spent a lot of time focusing and pushing and trying to get energy behind excellent execution. Obviously, in a company as big as ours, like any big company, there's no way you can control all execution. So, people have different responsibilities. And as an example, our presidents are responsible for the product we make, what it looks like, and our store operations. But there's a lot of levers that I influence quite a bit. The first is capital allocation. The second is inventory purchasing. And then the third, of course, is expense management. So most importantly is capital allocation, right? Because that's going to influence what we are executing to. And we are very rigorous in trying to make sure that what we've invested in is meeting our expectations. So I think the capital allocation role is particularly important. Inventory in our business, it's our greatest asset and it can be our greatest liability. So we've created a governance structure that all inventory purchases have to be approved by me. Now, that's not the content, to be clear, because again, I'm not picking the merchandise itself, but the quantity and the cost and the amount of inventory we hold has to come through me. So we try to keep that really tight and really disciplined. And then, of course, like most CFOs, we have our eye on a big lever in terms of managing our expenses to make sure they stay in line with our overall revenue base.
So let me just ask a follow-up question to that. So those three facets of the way you influence the brand actions, how does that tie to the overall vision or strategy of what Gap Inc. is trying to achieve?
From a financial architecture perspective, let me speak first as a CFO. Obviously, what we're trying to achieve from a broad perspective is to be a beloved brand globally that produces mostly great American casual style for the globe and in a very aspirational way. But from a financial architecture perspective, or an investment thesis, if you will, what we're trying to deliver is value to our shareholders. And our economic formula and the way we think about that, because our base is already about $16 billion, we don't really, shoot for enormous revenue growth because we realize that shooting too high for that can bring on many unintended consequences and risks. So we look for moderate revenue growth. We look to leverage our expenses, manage them tightly and responsibly, leverage our expenses, and that should drop down to sort of a high single-digit earnings per share, EBIT growth rate, and a double-digit earnings per share growth rate. So that's the goal we align around, and everything's done under that filter. So when we look at our long-range planning, that's the puzzle that our 5 brands are trying to pull together and deliver.
In a world that's so effervescent, change is so exponential, how do you not become risk averse? How do you apply the idea that you can't have certainty on every chance you take? How do you bring that to your organization so that your management is not risk averse?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question because it is super important in the world today to change. Our founder was always famous, Don Fisher always said, change or fail. So you really must change, and there's no way to change without taking risk. So you must embrace risk. So it's a matter of what risks are you choosing to take and how are you pacing those risks. And I think most importantly in our organization, again, because there's a lot going on between 5 brands in so many geographies and in so many channels. What's really important is to keep an eye on the cumulative impact of risk, because we've also seen how we can talk ourselves into small risk, small risk, small risk, all sound individually fine. But when you zoom out and you look cumulatively, you go, wait a minute, that's quite a bit of risk. So there's, the few of us in the center who are trying to assess not only those individual risks with their individual leader who's presenting them, but also really assessing, importantly, the cumulative risks to the enterprise, and have we struck that balance right, or have we gone too far?
When you talk about risk, you often think about risk vis-a-vis growth, but you've also had experiences of shrinking in certain regards. I mean, as part of the morphing process, closing some stores, getting out of certain lines of product or business. How do you lead when you're not growing, when you're actually going through some tough times and even shrinking in some parts?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, because it is, I think, much more, having dealt with big downturns and then some really good years as well, it is really difficult to lead both through change and through downturns. I always try and focus on the silver linings, of which there are many. I mean, I think great business, as fun as it is, great business can beget, a little bit of sloppiness, and it covers up a lot of operational issues that really should be addressed. So the silver linings of downturns is that it exposes those opportunities, and people are actually hungry to address them, to help the turnaround. So I think that's a silver lining. I think leading through downturns requires an immense amount of communication. And as a leader, that's always a big responsibility, is to communicate. But I think that in downturns, it becomes even more exaggerated, because you're looking at elevated retention risk, and you never want to lose your best talent. So it's absolutely critical to continue to talk about where you are going, how you're going to get there, and why people should believe that you're going to get there. So tough, but you learn the most. I mean, I really have embraced those downturns as times of great personal development.
You either challenge your own incumbency, or the challenger challenges your incumbency and eats your lunch. We've seen it in both ways. How do you challenge your incumbency and the things you've done well? How do you create a challenging mentality in your company?
A little bit back to the values of our founder with that change and fail. But the truth is, it is extremely difficult to challenge success, right? Because you kind of just want that train to keep going until it stops. One of the things that we did is we looked at some of our best competitors and how, because we had a period of time where we realized that we were letting our trends and our assortments probably live to their maturity, and then they would drop off a cliff, and it would create great volatility in our business. And I think we've embraced that, we can no longer just allow ourselves to let that maturity curve go without new seeds of what's coming in trend. So now we're very focused on what we call the trend funnel, and trying to make sure that as good as, our rock star jean is, or our top seller is, we cannot relax and rely on the cash flow from that, but we have to be investing in the next newest trend that's going to create the next, great idea for us and our customers.
You're a very big corporation with 3,700 stores, some mostly owned by the company, some franchisees now heading towards the internet channel in a big way. And I know you shop at the various Gap Inc. brand stores. How do you assure, in terms of execution, that the shopper's experience is consistent across all of those geographies, across all of those stores, across all of those channels, and consistently fantastic.
Yes. I wish it were always consistently fantastic. That is absolutely our goal. Of course, there are times we fall short of that. But we have been on an organizational journey to try and address that very question as we've grown larger. And we have experimented with different models. So we had been organized for a very long time against channels and geographies. So we had presidents of online, president of outlet, president of specialty, president of Europe, et cetera. And we decided in 2012 that for the very point you're making, for better global consistency as we grew globally, we didn't want the brand to show up as a very different experience for someone in Japan than it did for someone in Texas versus someone in London. So we actually created global brand presidents so that we could drive that greater consistency of what the brand meant to all of our customers across the globe. That has largely helped that issue. Honestly, there are always trade-offs to any organizational change you make. So coming through that change, one of our questions now is, have we lost a little bit of the focus that we had when we did indeed have presidents over, say, the online channel, which is obviously a critical channel for our future growth? So we're kind of questioning ourselves now and deciding, is there a tweak of the model? Is there a way to adopt so we can sort of get the best of both worlds in terms of consistency and focus on those individual geographies and channels?
So it's about organizational structure.
Absolutely, yeah.
Sabrina, thank you so much.
Thank you. My great pleasure.